And we're off again. It's 3 o'clock on your favorite local radio station, KFUG 101.1 on your FM dial. And before we get into the heart of the program, and you have to drink heavily in order to withstand the current conversation, I'd like to reach out to Ocean World. A special thanks to Ocean World here in Crescent City for underwriting today's broadcast. Since 1964, Ocean World has brought locals and tourists alike face to face with the wonders of the sea. Whether you're marveling at the daredevil exploits of Cora the sea lion, learning about tide pool ecosystems, or petting a live shark, Ocean World offers a unique view into the beauty and mystery of the deep. And don't forget that one-of-a-kind gift shop, great for a vacation souvenir or a last-minute gift for your favorite local. Ocean World, 304 Highway 101 South here in Crescent City. Open 7 days a week. Or visit them online at www.oceanworldonline.com. Or, if you want further information, please call 707-464-4900. That's 707-464-4900. And thanks for supporting your local community radio station. Well, this afternoon, for your listening pleasure, we're going to continue with the nefarious Jesse Davis here on KFUG and speak to him for another entire hour. Hopefully, he will be able to stand up to the strain.
Not energy. You make me nervous, Sam.
Make you nervous. Uh-oh. Well, I'm hoping. Let's see. I've got the right microphone here up for you. Otherwise, you're not going to be talking to anybody. Would you please? Pardon? Let's see which one we got. Go ahead.
Check test.
Oh, here we go. We not got either.
I love Sam's show. I love Sam's show. All right.
Yeah. I wonder why I'm not getting to you through the headphones. In any event, since I wasn't quite sure whether you'd take me up on my offer to appear,
certainly,
and
yeah.
You have actually, in fact, spent a couple of hours previously with me, which I thoroughly enjoyed, I might add.
Yeah, me too.
And it is often the case where people think that they care about what I have to say. But in reality, the whole point of this program is to talk to somebody that has, some sort of different perspective on the world that is of interest, particularly to the local community. And as I came prepared to talk about quite a number of other topics, actually, the delegation that was packing their bags from Japan, the county board and their adopts a personal cannabis agenda, the harbor initiative.
Cheers.
Pardon?
Cheers to that one.
There you go. The Harbor Initiative, which has cleared the board for being on the November ballot. A little piece by a fellow from Dixon that, generally speaking, is of interest to me. Also, the recall that currently is in place, and the city water system and their upgrades to the current situation that we have here in Crescent City. Plus, we have new faces on the Solid Waste Board Committee. I mean, I could go on forever. The harbor is looking for input into their plan for putting a tax or a head tax on the November ballot, which, having spent a fair amount of my time at one way or another in the harbor as either a commercial fisherman or as a member of Mary Wilson's staff at Ocean World and their pumping operation out of the harbor for the aquarium, the harbor has been kind of something that's interested me for a long time. But we're here to talk about something else, so we'll throw all of that in the trash can.
Well, don't let this little topic dominate the landscape. It's really not that interesting.
Well, as I said actually in an article in the Crescent City Times about my opinion about the harbor bed tax and the fact that the harbor has for a number of years not been exactly very productive. And of course, a majority of that problem or that issue has occurred because California has a real problem with resource-based industries and has taken kind of a hardline attack on most industries like that. The commercial fishing industry, for instance, is dealing with upgraded regulations, gear regulations, MPLAs, just a whole host of things that make it really difficult. For
having been in the manufacturing, not cannabis manufacturing, but traditional machine manufacturing industry since I was 16 or 17, I know exactly what you're talking about. Nothing but complaints in the shop about onerous regulation making business too expensive.
Well, right. I mean, and you can understand to a certain extent, California tends to be a fairly liberal state, and as a consequence, a lot of the activity in Sacramento tends to focus around regulating its citizens and taxing them correspondingly in order to pay for all of the kinds of things that they regulate. In any event, the harbor, of course, has had this problem where I believe it was the late 80s was the last time that they had a peak in their landings, which is where they get a fair amount of their money, and it's shrunk steadily ever since, to the point where we have about a 2-week crab season in the wintertime, which produces a fair amount of money, and the number of boats in the harbor which provide money to the harbor for their mooring has shrunk dramatically, particularly after the 2011 tsunami.
Al Gore was right, huh? There's no more fish. Just kidding.
Well, that's
my global warming joke.
That's a distinct possibility that there's no more fish, but if nobody's fishing, it's pretty hard to tell whether there's no more fish.
That's right.
And the commercial fishing industry for the last, perhaps 10 to 12 years has literally been pretty much wiped out in terms of...
It's a tough industry. I have a friend with 2 boats. He has a salmon boat and a crab boat here in the harbor, and it's good reason to not be in the business. It's hard to make money with the cost of it now. So.
Now, I mean, primarily my interest, of course, and the general direction of this program is to kind of fish around and look for things that are going to benefit Delaware County. I mean, I have 3 children, none of which have been able to stay here, primarily because there's literally very little in the way of opportunity for people that have a little bit of drive. I mean, generally speaking, when you look at just the overall energy that's in the county, I mean, typically you can look at even the voting record, for instance, in this last election, where literally
low turnout.
Yes, there was. I mean, the turnout was non-existent. You hear people carp and
it was like 30%. It was like 30%.
It was a bit over, actually. It was closer to 40%.
Oh, that's not bad in terms of
that's
turnout.
Not bad for a rural community. Correct.
In a summer midterm.
Well, particularly, it wasn't even a midterm. It was a primary.
Right, summer primary. Rather.
The interest would only be there if there was some great driving need for change someplace, and pretty clearly the electorate didn't feel that it was necessary to generate any energy towards this election. So as a consequence, we're electing people nowadays on 20 to 30% of the popular vote, which is
there's very little participation in the political process. Very few people understand what their political rights are, and I've seen that with people misunderstanding how recalls work.
Well, true enough. I mean, I've been listening fairly carefully, and I've read the article in the paper, and I've read the article in Donna's Crescent City Times. I've also made some comments primarily to try to get direction from you as to what was going on with regard to the recall. And
I left a reply last night. I don't know if you saw it this morning.
I read the reply. Okay. I mean, I try to stay up to date. And I guess what puzzles me is the triplicate is calling you
misquoted in the triplicate.
I mean, is there a reason for that? I mean,
sorry, I didn't mean to put words in your mouth.
Right.
But they did name me as the main proponent, which isn't accurate.
Well, actually, they called you the proponent. They didn't say anything about main. But
okay, yeah, but that's depending on how you use the term. But in the legal term, in terms of the recall, I am not a proponent because I'm not in either District 1 or 5. I'm a proponent in spirit, or an advocate, I suppose. But in terms of the legal definition of a proponent of this recall, I am not a proponent.
Well, then the next question I suppose I would have to ask is, if you're not a proponent, how invested were you in initiating the process, or did you initiate the process?
Yeah, I did it. I started it myself. I was.
Would you describe yourself as the initiator, or?
Sure. Yeah, I can describe kind of exactly what I did.
That would be really very nice, because
sure.
That's confused me.
And I did in the Crescent City Times. So I described just simply, because it was so simple. I did so little, and that's the confusion. So after a couple of weeks of thinking about how it was probably too late to start a recall initiative in order to get it on the November ballot, I finally decided I would inform myself with a phone call to the recorder's office, just out of curiosity purely, and to kind of gauge the response. So I called and I got the information, and I learned about what the process was, and I found out it's really easy. There's nothing to it. You fill out a form. It's tedious, and there's details, and it has to be accurate. So you can make clerical errors that can cause delays, of course. But I do things like I told Paul, I do things every day in my regular life that are much more complicated than this. And that was it. I created the form, and I handed it to a few people who I thought would be interested. Got an enormous response. Couldn't understand why nobody had done it before, and I ran the ad, and like I told Paul, I know exactly why people hadn't done it before, because of the all kinds of nasty attacks that people want to launch against me personally that have nothing to do with policy or the Board of Supervisors or the county at large. So
no, you see, I don't have, direct contact or direct experience with a recall, but my experience is with a voter initiative, in which here in Del Norte County we went through the probably pretty similar paperwork, which is the easy part, and then forming a group and making an effort to collect the signatures. And in our case, we had to collect, I believe it was around 2,500 signatures at 25% of the entire county.
It's the same with the recall. Yeah, there has to be more signatures than either Bob or Roger even received to win election, and just to hold an election. So for people to be afraid, for Bob and Roger to be worried, if they're worried, then that's telling, they shouldn't be worried at all. If they're confident that they've been right by their constituents, and they have absolutely nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I think, where we're getting at cross purposes, at least for me, is, when we took on this initiative, there were some pretty serious considerations for me personally, and my wife in particular, in that we were dealing with the school system who wanted to go year-round education with 3 of the schools. Not all of them, just 3 of them. And the objective of the school district was to get a brand new year-round school, which they did get without having to go to year-round.
Right.
Okay, we went through the process primarily due to the fact that we would have had at different times 3 children in 3 different schedules. So pretty clearly they had a very personal motivation in our case. But in the larger picture, the school district was claiming that the classrooms were overstuffed. They had more children than an individual teacher could handle. And yet, when you looked at the loading standards by the state and you looked at the school district, that wasn't true at all. And so the idea generally became the idea that in order for the school district to get this new school in the first place, which they felt that they desperately needed, which also wasn't true, that they had to go year-round.
Right.
So when I look at your explanation...
Sounds like a mixing of motives and a mixing of intentions and stuff to me. So.
Well, that's the problem I'm having with you. I look at your reasoning for recall, And quite frankly, it seems rather frivolous and rather immature.
Well, if as an example, I guess with the school should have just said, if they want to assert that they need lower class density, then just assert that. I mean, nobody can argue with a teacher. Okay, I know great schools where when there's more than 20 kids in the class, it's an overload, okay? And better classes have more like 15. So that's extremely subjective. So if a school wants to assert that their classroom density is too high, then fine, they can assert that. But if they were being disingenuous in saying that the school had to go year-round in order to get the funding, that's a totally different issue. Now, maybe they were incorrect. Maybe they were misinformed. Maybe they genuinely believed, based on the information that they had, that the only way they were going to be able to secure funding was to do it on a year-round school basis. I have no idea. I didn't follow that story at all.
Unfortunately.
Sure, yeah. I can totally understand that. But you get what I'm getting at, right?
Right, I understand.
So if there was a reason, then it makes sense. If it was an ulterior motive because of something else, then that's just stupid. They didn't need to do that. They could have just said, we believe we need lower class density, period. If you want to argue with us on that, good luck. But going in in some sideways direction doesn't make any sense. And that's what I find funny about people trying to pin personal reasons with me on this recall when it seems so entirely irrelevant. I'm not even a proponent of it. Why don't people ask any one of the proponents on this? Why don't people ask any of one of the thousands of people who are upset with Bob and Roger for any one of thousands of reasons? I think I welcome it. I think it's distracting for Bob and Roger. I think it helps the case for the recall to be focusing on me or cannabis or other distracting issues.
But how does that benefit the county?
What, the distracting conversation?
Or any of it? How does
the distracting conversation doesn't benefit. That's just a side effect of uninformed voters. So that's an unfortunate side effect of being in a representative republic that works under principles of democracy.
Yeah, but again, how does the recall benefit the county? That's what I'm trying to get at. You haven't really given me a reasonable response or a reasonable argument for why that benefits the county.
Well, we won't know until after it happens or not.
Well, I mean, that's typically why you have a 4-year period for that to
develop.
There's
also a process for having an election any time in between. Not any time. There's a time period right after an election, you can't do it, and there's a time period right before an election, you can't do it. Okay, is that what it is? Yeah. But there's a process. It's exactly like going to the polls.
I mean,
it's no different.
The other thing that puzzles me is you've targeted Bob Berkowitz, who came into office the same time as Lori Cowan. If there's a dysfunction at the board, then it would seem like those two would be the ones that you would recall rather than, I mean, I don't know what Roger Gitlin is why he's there. I mean, that's what I don't understand.
Why he's on the board or why he's on the recall?
Why he's there on the recall. I mean, there's a lot of conflicts in your logic that
I'm not trying to present logic. I think that's where the confusion is you're trying to look for logic, and I'm initiating a political process.
Well, on the other hand, it makes your political process seem rather frivolous. Like I say, how do you respond to that?
I would say that how on earth is an election frivolous?
Well, it is when you do it over and over and over again. It becomes counterproductive. I mean, I'll give you an example.
Define over and over and over again.
I'll give you an example. My wife and I have spent a fair amount of time in Italy, and Italy has a voting process like we do here, only they have far more in the way of political parties than we have here.
Right.
In the course of going to Italy at one time period, and then going 2 years later, there were 22 different elections and 22 different governments in Italy.
Yeah, that's extreme.
How does that become functional when you're changing people as fast as you're throwing clothes in the washing machine?
That example is absolutely dysfunctional. Well, I cannot be disputed. And if anybody in Delaware County wanted to propose having 22 elections in 2 years, I would call them crazy.
Yeah, I understand.
So you're trying to say that having one election in between a regular election, no, you're saying having one election in between a regular election is like having 22 elections in 2 years. That's kind of stupid, actually.
Well, no, it's not stupid, because you basically know going into the polls at the beginning of a person's term that he's going to be there for 4 years.
And that they're subject to a recall at any time.
But
they're not subject to 22 recalls in that time.
Well, they could be.
No, there actually isn't enough time to do 22 recalls. The timeline of the recall process, because of the timeline you have to do stuff, you couldn't do it 22 times. You couldn't do it 10 times. I don't think you could do it 3 times.
You could make it to the point.
Okay, if I do it 3 times, Sam, then you got a point. We'll come back and talk about it if I do it 3 times. How about twice? If I do it twice, then you got a point.
Now you've basically thrown the glove down on the ground. What's to say somebody doesn't come back and recall Lori Collin?
Well, they certainly could.
Okay,
Chris and Jerry too, and the people who, if the recall is successful, if there's replacements for Bob and Roger, they could come in and be recalled too. I mean, what do you mean? What's the kind of questions are you asking?
What I'm trying to gain from you is some sort of benefit to Del Norte County for this kind of behavior.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
Let me shut this off. Forgot to turn off my phone.
And we will take a quick time out, and we will do a quick station identification. This is KFUG 101.1 on your FM dial. You're listening to Conversations with Sam, 3 to 4 every Sunday afternoon, sunny, cloudy, or otherwise. And we have the pleasure of having for our guest today, I got a minute, Jesse Davis, the nefarious, let's see, how was it described? The nefarious newly appointed drug dealer or drug lord of Del Norte County. Just kidding, folks. Anyway, we've lost our guest, and we have his significant other here, his daughter, in the studio. And she's going to step over to the microphone and say hi, please, right here. Please identify yourself.
Hello, my name is Lila.
Great. And she's here to celebrate Father's Day, which my scallywags, the 3 of them, have not made any effort to get a hold of me today to wish me happy Father's Day. But Jesse has taken the time, and his daughter has taken her time to spend the day to enjoy this delightful holiday. Perhaps if I talk loud enough, my daughter in North Carolina will hear me, and my son in the state of Washington will also hear me. But somehow I'll have to be satisfied with taking a trip up to Brookings and spending the time with my youngest son, who has agreed to foot the bill for a pleasant evening at some place where they have fine dining. Oops.
Excellent.
We appear to have another father in the house. Jesse is back with us, and we have some time left to grill him about his nefarious activities here in Del Norte County.
So nefarious. Yes. Yes. Okay,
kidding,
so let me attempt
folks.
to answer very accurately and clearly, specifically what you're getting at. I think.
That would be appreciated. I mean,
the benefit to the county.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. I believe that elections in general are a benefit to any process where policy making is involved in government. So having elections is a benefit to the county. And I hear a huge number of people very dissatisfied with 2 supervisors. And there is a process to initiate a recall and give voters the opportunity to vote anytime, almost, during any elected official's term. And I think it's entirely appropriate when there are very large numbers of people expressing dissatisfaction to then do something about it. And I'm echoing what I told Paul, because he asked the same question in a pointed way. You know, he wasn't doing it from a supporter's perspective. He was doing it from the perspective of really wanting an answer and a reason for the recall. And the reason is simply this: it's an electoral process. It's a political right to do it. And I gave the example. If I were to initiate a recall on Sheriff Eric Apperson, I would guess that would not be a successful recall, because the sheriff is loved and respected for the most part in this community. I don't hear people clamoring to remove the sheriff. I do hear people in droves in all walks of life, everywhere I go, in every medium of communication. I hear people complaining about Bob and Roger, but I see nobody doing anything about it. And now I know why nobody's done anything about it, because of fear of retaliation from people who would rather go on personal attacks rather than debate anything of substance. And I think that right there is an excellent reason. That's all the reason I need to give. And if anyone has more questions, they can ask any of the proponents on the list. They can ask any of the people who would be willing to sign the recall petition and hear it from the voters directly. I don't need to do that.
Yeah, see, here's the thing. Apparently, you and I run in entirely different circles.
Yeah, definitely.
I hear just the opposite.
Right. I think that you and Bob and Roger and the morning.
I don't have a whole lot of association with Roger.
Oh, okay. I think they live in an echo chamber for sure.
I don't have a lot of. I mean, I went to a few of the morning town halls that they had.
Right.
And I'm a listener. Sure. I'm not generally someone that speaks.
Yeah, I've been to a handful also.
Yeah, unless I have something to say.
True.
But I hear. Literally, I mean, when you say thousands, I think that's kind of stretching it a little bit.
Oh, my ear isn't to thousands. Yeah. I don't even know thousands. I might know 100 people, but.
Well, see, I've lived in this county for 40 years, right. And I know a lot of people.
Sure.
And the general feeling, and these are not people that are, hardcore political people.
Sure. Well, each of them won by about 50 votes.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty narrow election.
I understand
that.
And
I'm not saying that as a reason. I mean, not that means anything, but.
But that's the premise for your whole argument for doing a recall, is that you
absolutely.
You feel that there's literally this massive group out there that
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I mean, the term massive, I don't know. Let's just suffice it to say, there exists a group of voters who want to hold an election, and there's a legal process to do it. And I find it extremely puzzling why people are questioning an electoral process, and I think it's because people don't understand the recall process. I hear a lot of people who don't understand that
it's not
people
that.
Could have held recalls themselves and they didn't.
Yeah, it's not that at all. The reason being, the reason why recalls aren't more prolific in Del Norte County is because we have had a similar style government for probably as long as I've been familiar with the political process. The people come and go. There's always a divisive nature on the board. There always is.
So why is there no recalls?
Because...
Well, there was. I mean, Bob and Roger, and they kind of orchestrated the recall against Lori, right after she got elected.
Actually, I think you're probably looking at the wrong person there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm speaking out my ear on that one. But there was a recall.
Take it from me. You're looking at the wrong person.
Oh, I'm not looking at you. I'm not blaming you.
It wasn't.
I'm not blaming you.
No. And I wouldn't have anything to do with the recall.
I just know that Bob and Roger were happy about it. They said numerous times at the morning coffee what a disappointment Lori was. And
I'm certain that Jerry Hemingston and Chris Howard are going to be basically singing the same song. But there's a group of people in Del Norte County that would like to see both Chris and Jerry gone.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we heard from them loud and clear during the election this year.
And I suspect that it's probably in equal numbers to what you're hearing from Roger Getland.
Yeah, let's hold an election to find out.
But the problem being, of course, is that's not always the answer. I mean, I learned when I did the initiative with respect to year-round education, that isn't always the best way.
No, not always the best way.
No.
Definitely not always the best way.
And unless, the voters here in this county are going to vote on anything other than emotion, which pretty clearly is what you're talking about here, you're not talking about any substantive change in the board.
I haven't heard anything
one way or the other.
I'm not getting your reason why there haven't been recalls. You said that it's been people who come and go, but why haven't there been recalls? Why haven't people
ordinarily
stood up for what they believe in and held a recall?
I'll tell you why. You looked at the last election. 60% of the voters, the registered voters, didn't bother to go to the polls.
So that's why people don't hold a recall?
Pardon?
That's why people aren't holding a recall?
It's the apathy that we have in this county.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's exactly my point, Sam. There's all this apathy. There's all these people who are complaining and not doing anything about it.
And the thing about it is...
And people are mad because I'm finally doing something about it.
Well, your recall is going to create much more of this dysfunction that you're trying to resolve. I can tell you that right out of the gate. I mean, seriously. I know you don't want to hear it.
No, I don't mind hearing it. I have no problem hearing it.
I don't have a problem particularly with it.
it.
But that's what you're setting yourself up for.
Well, I know that I'm setting myself up for it. It's not me.
You are a
holding
citizen
an
of the
election.
county.
Yeah, but okay, right.
You are a citizen of the county.
Well, yeah, but I just don't single me out. Say us. Say us. Don't single me out. Right.
I mean, I'm too old and I'm too old and ignorant to worry about what's going to happen to me in the future.
You would have to. Every single person who signs the petition to make it successful, they're the ones who are setting it up. And it's really misplaced for people to be blaming me.
It has to start someplace.
Exactly. You think that I started the dissatisfaction with Bob and Roger?
The recall has to start someplace.
Yeah, but that's just a piece of paper. It didn't start with the piece of paper. It started with all the dissatisfaction. You're not getting that, are you? It doesn't, just because you think that there's more people who like Bob and Roger, it doesn't matter what you think.
You're making a huge mistake there.
What? What's
that? You think that I think that the dissatisfaction is from people who do not like Chris or Jerry.
There's dissatisfaction all around, I think is fair to say, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And
we're going to have an election, and it's going to have an outcome.
It's going to have an outcome, but you're not going to change anything.
I'm not trying to change anything. I can't even vote in the election, Sam.
The voters will not change anything.
How do you know?
Because I've lived in this county for 40 years, and I've seen this behavior.
Well, you certainly can't predict the future, so I welcome your opinion based on all this experience. But you need to say that. Okay, great.
That's my opinion.
Sure, but you have to also acknowledge that you are not the holder of the crystal ball, and you do not know whether or not we're even going to have an election, first of all, and you don't know the outcome of that election if it takes place.
I'm hoping that this will occur. Your recall will take place and the election will occur.
Oh, okay, great.
I don't have a problem with that part of the process. What I have a problem with is...
I'm confused now. I'm really confused now. I thought your whole problem was having the election.
No, it's how you've approached this. It's just kind of in a cavalier, kind of casual fashion.
It is very cavalier and casual. It's very cavalier and casual.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that more people are not confident enough to assert their political rights, whether it be casual and cavalier or whatever opposite terms you might give to that. However you operate, however kind of person you are, it's absolutely every citizen's responsibility to inform themselves and fully take advantage of their political rights. But nobody does it. Nobody does it. Not nobody. I'm doing it, and people are pissed off because I'm asserting my political rights, and it's ridiculous.
But I mean, I don't even see you asserting your political rights. I mean, what I see is this kind of frivolous notion that you can casually go into the county courthouse and take out papers to recall.
You can.
people.
That's how it works, Sam.
But the problem is,
That's exactly how it
may
works.
work that way, but without a substantive reason for doing that from a personal standpoint.
You don't have to have that's the worst reason to launch a recall, a personal reason.
Yes.
That's the lowest, most childish, most immature reason to launch a recall.
You have
yes,
to have
it is.
some...
It doesn't have to be personal.
Why would I have initiated an initiative for the school district if there wasn't some
because you believed that it was the right
motivation?
thing to do. Why else would you do it?
Benefit.
It's just like when people vote personally.
Benefit.
I hate it when people vote personally. They vote their pocketbook. They vote for their job. Instead of voting for what's right for the community as a whole.
Never going to happen.
Exactly. And that's why that's one of the problems.
So you admit
don't fault me. No.
You admit it's never going to happen.
Well, maybe it's never going to happen, but we got to start somewhere. I am hopeful of the future. I am hopeful of a day when one more person than today participates in the political process, and to me, that's success.
I'm glad I'm successful enough in my old age that if I choose to abandon California, I can.
Yes, it might
be. If I choose to abandon Delaware County, I can.
Not always. I've definitely wanted to leave the state for a long time, especially when I was younger. I didn't ever make it out, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, the state already makes it hard enough for us to live here.
Sure, I'm no liberal. I love people,
particularly
pretend that I'm
County.
a liberal because I'm starting a recall on the two so-called conservatives, and I think it's a sham to say that Bob and Roger are conservatives. They are not conservatives. Like, they're not my brand of conservatism. I don't know what they're trying to conserve. It certainly isn't constitutional values of freedom. So. Yeah, conservatism is extremely misunderstood, and I stand by my statement that I'm probably one of the most conservative people in our county from the standpoint of the founders of our Constitution. Bold statement,
shocked.
huh? Bold statement.
I'm shocked. There, you at one point in the I believe I think it was a comment you made to me in response to one of the questions that I proposed to you, and basically it was defining what a proponent was, and you came back at me and said that you weren't a proponent, that you were what you would term as an advocate. And what I would like to ask you is, what do you think the difference is between a proponent and an advocate?
Oh, well, if you just look up the word, that they mean the same thing. I was just referring to in terms of the legal definition as it relates to a recall petition. The proponents are the registered voters of the district, and they sign the form. So I can't be a legal proponent of this recall in terms of how that word is used on the form, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So,
but I'm a proponent in the more general definition of the word, independent of its legal restrictions in this context.
So when it talked about the initiator, the proponent, and the initiator of a recall.
You see, that's the confusion. Is that the guy who types the form and takes it to the newspaper and drops the envelope in the mail to the supervisors? Like, anybody can do. I don't even have to be a U.S. citizen.
You don't think that's an initiator then?
Well, it's a clerical job. Like the proponents of this recall could have hired a lawyer, right? They could have hired anybody to do it if they wanted to, right? And here's the thing. I'm going to answer my own question about why there aren't recalls here, and I don't think that you're in tune with it. I think that there's a huge level of intimidation. There's a massive intimidation factor, and I didn't get it right up until 2 days ago. I didn't get the backlash. I didn't get the vitriol and the personal attacks that we're going to, I kind of thought, but I didn't expect it. And that's why when I talk to people who are way more personally invested in getting rid of Bob and Roger than I am, who actually hate that, I don't hate them. right? Like, there's a lot of people who genuinely hate them, but they are scared to death. They're not going to put their names on it because they're afraid of personal retaliation. They're afraid of personal harm to their personal physical well-being and to their property. And I get it now. After the shit that sorry about that word, after all the garbage that I saw on social media, attacking me personally, spreading my personal information, my addresses, saying all kinds of libel-based rumors that are not true, which is basically putting my personal safety at risk, my family at risk, because they're angry with me expressing for taking advantage of my political rights. And that is why people are intimidated in this county, because of bullies and because of, frankly, sick people who are willing to make personal threats against people who all they're doing is trying to vote. And it's ridiculous.
But you're not trying to vote.
You know what I'm saying, though? People who are trying to engage in a political process. I'm not even trying to vote. All I did was fill out some forms. I did some clerical things, and I put it in the hands of the people who are going to vote. Nobody's attacking the 50 proponents that are printed.
Well, you said they were.
Not like this. They're going after me because they see me as the leader. They see me as the proponent. And I took that role. I put my name on the envelope and I dropped it in the mail. I put my business return address in Arcata because I knew that other people didn't want to get the backlash. I'm the scapegoat of this. I'm taking the blame. I'm taking the heat, so to speak. I'm taking all the crap, all the really borderline illegal crap that's coming at me because the proponents, the voters, the legal proponents of it are afraid for whatever reason. And I'm not. And there's finally, I'm the first person who came along in this county who isn't afraid of the intimidation and the threats, the physical threats to me. And I'm not afraid of it. And it's a shame that that's what people have to endure just to exercise their political rights. It's ridiculous.
I mean, you're kind of describing Delaware County as something akin to a third world country where, if you happen to disagree with somebody, they come after you with an axe handle.
Yeah, not a third world country, like a developed, first world, like Russia, where if you try to go after Putin, you get executed.
So your vision of what Delaware County is like is...
Well, there's groups. There's a small handful of people who are like that. Luckily, most people aren't like that. But there's a small group of people who are willing to act crazy and intimidate people physically because they disagree with them politically. And that's baloney.
I mean, this is something I've known for years. This is not anything new.
Sure. Well, here I am standing up to it. He shouldn't be surprised by it. And that's a shame that people have accepted that.
I guess
that's a damn shame.
I guess what I'm surprised by is the characterization. I mean, it's pretty harsh.
What's that?
Your characterization of the people in Delaware County.
I'm not characterizing people of Delaware County.
Granted, you're reducing
whoa.
You're reducing it to a small number, but still.
So are you defending the people who
no,
publicly...
I'm not defending them at all,
Oh.
But I've lived in this county for 40 years, and I have never experienced any kind of intimidation, and you know how...
Because you've never launched a recall against 2 supervisors.
Well, but...
Because you're afraid to, probably. Look what the hell happened to me, Sam. That's why. If you can't see why people are afraid to launch a recall, then you're blind. I've been attacked by a small handful of, frankly, crazy people. And that's why other people are afraid to stand up for their political rights.
That's pretty sad.
It is sad.
That's
it's really
sad. For you, though.
Not for me. It's sad for the people who have been afraid.
If you feel that way, that's pretty sad.
Wait, what do you mean?
That you feel that people who have a problem, that are mentally challenged or whatever, however you're going to describe them, that it all of a sudden becomes your problem?
I'm totally missing your point.
Well,
You're not making any sense whatsoever.
No, you seem to think that because, I mean...
It's a problem. Okay, This is pretty crazy, Sam. You're telling me that you can't recognize that it's a problem when people are intimidated to the point that they're afraid to exercise their political rights. You can't recognize that?
Never been in that
I'm
position.
not talking about you. Good for you. There's a lot of people who are.
I can't imagine anybody being in that kind of position.
I can't either. That's what I'm saying. Look what I'm doing. I'm obviously not afraid if you can't recognize that. It's a shame that there's so many people who are. If you disagree with me on that, that's perfectly fine for you to disagree with my assertion that there are a huge number of people who are afraid to stand up for their political rights. That's all. If you want to disagree with that, that's perfectly valid to disagree with that.
The problem I'm having is with afraid, that terminology.
Okay, pick a different word then. Get off the semantic game and pick a different word.
I mean, from what I can see, at least in the political spectrum in Del Norte County, it isn't that people are necessarily afraid of anything. It's just it's too much trouble to get out of bed in the morning.
That's
and go
one
to the
also.
polls.
That's one also.
And I don't know how you're going to change that. I don't know how a recall is going to change that. I don't know.
I'm not trying to change
how
that.
a new election is going to change that. That's what I'm not understanding. I mean, I'm okay with the process, but I'm not understanding what's going to happen.
It's a grand adventure, Sam, and nobody knows what's going to happen.
Well, I've been on grand adventures, and very often it's just more of the same.
Sometimes it is, but I think the only way to experience a paradigm shift sometimes is to go down the road less traveled and open the door which you do not know what lies behind it and venture bravely forth.
Again, it all comes off as being rather frivolous.
Well, you can choose the word frivolous if you want. I wouldn't choose the word frivolous. I could pick a different word if you're interested in what word I would use.
I'm always up for a new adventure.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't use the word frivolous because frivolity sort of... Yeah, well, I'd have to get the dictionary out to do this right. Like, my feeling of frivolity is sort of...
I'm happy for any conversation I have with you because it's a pleasure. Let me tell you.
Me too. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I respect your questions
you.
and your time on the air with you, so that's why I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
No, it's
Yeah,
it doesn't. It's not as uptight. It doesn't need to be as up. Yeah, I do. I appreciate that, and I think we're getting there, kind of.
I hope so.
I hope everyone can handle the pain along the way.
I mean, I'm not even feeling the pain. I mean,
no, not us. I just imagine it could be painful to listen to from the outside.
Well, that's too bad.
Frustrating because I'm holding back some juicy thing, and that's the thing is that everybody wants some thing. Somebody wants some dirt or something. And I'm not even concerned about. I just like process.
Dessert.
I just like process. I just think it's cool that I can go to the recorder's office and I can get a stack of papers and I can fill out a form and there's a bunch of people who agree. Like I said, I wouldn't do this where there wasn't a bunch of drive behind it, in my personal private opinion, based on my little circle, that doesn't cross over, right? So I wouldn't do that, and I think it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do and I'll stand by the statement. I think that there are people who are really, really passionate about their position against Bob and Roger. And I believe that they feel genuinely intimidated out of doing anything. Now we can debate that forever, right? It's too subjective for me to prove or for anyone to disprove. It's just my observations based on my limited contact with my little circle. And that's it. I don't need a bigger reason. And that's what is important for everybody to understand. You don't need a big hoo-ha to participate in any legal form of politics. It's silly. And that's the whole thing, is that everybody is trying to put this other qualification. Nowhere in the recall petition forms, nowhere in state law does it say that I have to be personally upset about anything. It says that I have to give a statement that's less than 200 words, and the sufficiency of that statement cannot be reviewed. It says that right in state law. If anybody cared to look, anybody can do this. I heard people complaining forever about Chris and Jerry. Why the hell didn't they get off their lazy asses and do a recall? Maybe they were intimidated. I have no idea. All right? But from my perspective, which is all that anyone has, I hear people expressing what I've said here over and over again, and I can't stand that kind of injustice. It's just a principle of mine. I don't care what it is. I don't care what the hell the topic is or who you are. If I hear people who are being intimidated out of standing up for what they believe, then that's it. That's the end of the line. I am going to do everything within my power to make sure that people can exercise their political freedoms and their political rights. Period.
Yeah, gotcha. It's truly unfortunate that federal representatives are not subject to recall.
Yeah, that's a whole other crazy story. God. Yeah, I mean, it would be... Well, they are in a way. You just have to get enough of your congresspeople on board, and they can get rid of fellow congresspeople and the president. It's just a bigger group.
One last question before we call it a day. We're getting pretty close to the 4 o'clock hour, and I've got a dynamic...
I have no hearts on my underwear, by the way.
Oh, sorry. I have a genuine invitation to a meal in Brookings with my youngest son, so I have to leave at an appropriate time. But
sure.
If I can, get my head square and straight, what I'd like to hear from, some sort of an impression you have for who is exactly the people that create, the whole process of. I mean, you're talking about. I've lost my train of thought, but I think in your interview you were policy creation. Who do you think creates policy in a local county government? Is it the supervisors or is it somebody else? I mean, I've sat in a number of board meetings.
It depends. It depends on the community. But as I was talking with Paul about, I think you were here when I was talking about it, kind of the role of the board. It's largely land use issues. The board of supervisors works.
No. That's not, who do you think puts?
Yeah, I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that. So the policy that gets created is largely land use policy that comes from community development department. So every county and city has some kind of community development department that includes your building department, your health inspection, yada yada. Planning, and that's like the vast majority of policy and legislation that comes to the board originates at the community development department. And then there's other topics like budget, spending money, things like that. And then, like we talked about, if you're like in a place like Arcata, you got city council members like telling you, what color your toilet paper needs to be and things like that. So, but that's not where we are in Delnar. Luckily we have a government that's not interested in trying to spend money on getting into your personal life comparatively to some other places like Arcata. We're mostly just based on the things that we got to do, the things that the community development has to do. Most of the stuff that comes to the board comes from departments and staff.
It's already put together.
Yeah, but exactly. It's all put together for the board, done over with some board input and with planning commission input. And with some limited public input, although it's weak because nothing's advertised and nothing is... But people don't have time. People don't have interest. There's no civics class. You don't learn about how government works.
The board meets in the middle of the day.
Yeah, but they have to because they can't meet at... I mean, they're at work too. So, I mean, for them to meet at night would be for them to have a night job, and it's like... I get it. There's a lot of holes in like how we set up democracy. It's difficult to participate in because in order to have these weird hours for government to run, we'd have to be asking all of our elected officials to work at weird hours. And it's like, we could do that, I guess.
Are you saying then it's relatively rare that the policy creation actually exists in the hands of the supervisors?
It's unfortunately rare. I think that it could be and should be. The supervisor should be more involved directly in policy creation. I don't know. I never sat on the board, so I can't speak for exactly the involvement.
But you have gone and sat.
I know. I just mean in terms of like how much involvement goes on. Like, okay, I'll use the cannabis working group as an example.
Yeah.
I'm on that board. We're creating policy. Okay, so I'll have a meeting sometimes with a member of community development department to like look at a map or something, or figure out like what we're going to bring to the next meeting or whatever, right? Like nobody knows how many hours I'm putting in. People don't know what I'm researching on my own at night, so I don't know how much input the board as a whole or individual members are putting into individual projects. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's appropriate for the board to inform themselves. Sometimes it's appropriate to just back off and just accept the recommendations of the community development department. They're professionals. They know what they're doing, and which for the most part they do. When stuff comes from staff and department, they just kind of just rubber stamp it, not in a bad way, but because it's had tons of review and the board doesn't know anything anyway. They don't necessarily have the information.
Well, I mean, is that the sense you get, that the board, generally speaking?
I get the sense that all boards are like that. I get the sense that Congress is like that. I get the sense that our state assembly is like that. Our president, everybody, they're so uninformed about the things that they're making decisions on, but they kind of have to be. Like, the board of supervisors can't know all the details that Randy Hooper knows when he's giving a presentation. That's impossible.
They're making decisions on those.
Right, but they had to do it based in trust, because they trust Randy Hooper. They trust the community development department to be honest and provide information. It's all relatively transparent, so that you can go and you can look at the process.
Do you see a weakness in that process where maybe sometimes the trust is not warranted, or do you think that
not from staff departments, not from the county departments? They're such professionals, and they have protocol that they have to follow, or their job's at risk. They can't go in there and like insert their political views into a planning project. I mean, you hear about terrible cases like that. Like in Humboldt County, there was a building inspector who was taking bribes, from the cannabis industry to like approve permits, and non-cannabis industry too,
I hate to burst your bubble, but that occurs in Delaware County.
Sure, it occurs everywhere.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think I mean, when we place such trust on people who are not elected, that very often the whole government process suffers for it.
Sure, but being distrustful just for the sake of being distrustful is not helpful. And I've seen that from Roger Gitlin toward staff heads and department heads, questioning their integrity almost, and it seems very unnecessary when if he would simply put in the time to see how they arrived at that information, he wouldn't need to be combative in questioning it. I'm not saying he does it all the time. I've just observed it.
Yeah, I don't see it very often. I've looked at every one of the board meetings, either on video or been there in personally. And
I've never seen Chris, Lori, or Jerry be adversarial or combative with a department person.
No, but they are with members of the board on a regular basis.
Yeah, but I think that it's not.
It's pretty depressing.
I watch it too, Sam,
yeah,
and I don't think that it takes two to tango, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
And so I have to say, when I hear people defending one or the other, it makes me want to throw up, because it takes two people to fight.
Yeah,
and I mean, some people continually start it over and over again, but other people don't handle it well. I'm saying, yeah, Roger and Bob start crap, and Chris doesn't handle it well sometimes.
He's
and it's
terrible at it.
But it's like saying, okay, like you're not doing a good job of handling people who are behaving like children. And so it's like your fault because you're not being a good parent. And I accept that responsibility with my kids, but I'm not going to accept that responsibility with like a coworker or an employee. I'm just going to fire your ass if you're going to be like that.
Yeah, but that's not what it is here. That's not what it is.
Well, sometimes it is. And in my view, when I see it, it's intentional combative actions from...
Chris is the chairman of the board.
Yeah.
He should have control over his board. Now, I'm not excusing the rest of the
when people talk,
when
there's a point of order, when Chris is asking for silence and another board member continues to speak and get angry, you're like, what are you going to do? Put a piece of duct tape on his mouth? The board, they can't.
Pretty serious consequences can occur if you handle the meal properly, the meeting properly.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Roger's been admonished by legal counsel several times from threat of legal action for the crap that he does to people. So yeah, it has been effective, and he's backed off and he's publicly apologized over things before.
And that's the way it should be.
Absolutely, with every board member, and I'm not just ones you don't like. I agree.
See, I've looked at fairly closely to the last, I don't know, probably 10, 12 elections, and this dysfunction that we have on the current board has repeated itself going back for as far as I can remember. And it's not always 3-2 or 4-1 or 2-3 or whatever.
Sure.
I think that it's something that's going to be a fact of life that we're going to have to deal with. And
could be
that, it's like I say, I don't have a particular problem with you starting a recall initiative to initiate it. I just think that it's too casual in nature.
I think it'll keep everybody on their toes. Yeah. I think it's great. I think that the supervisors need to realize how casually a recall can happen. And I think that they will be more careful and they will be more attentive to their constituents and work much harder at solving problems rather than trying to create division, now that they know how easy it is to be recalled and how vulnerable they are. I think it's extremely important. It's super casual. I could have just got drunk one day and decided to do it. That's how it can happen, right? So that's what they need to watch out for. You got to watch out. If you're going to go around pissing off people and riding a divisive line, then that's what you got. You got to watch out for the drunk guy who files a recall petition
that runs over you in the parking lot,
or that. Yeah.
And with that, I wish I could go on for another hour, but like I say,
another day.
I have a date.
Me too.
With my son, and I'm sure your lovely young lass of a daughter has more important things to do than sit in a chair and listen to two spar over largely things that she thinks are irrelevant at her age.
Yeah, I want her to see what Dad's been doing all this time.
Well, that's great. That's also very important, and I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
I also am appreciative of the fact that you did come and spend an hour with me, and I'm not sure you answered any of my questions, but that's not important. I certainly got a flavor of where you're at with respect to the recall. It's clear to me that you've distanced yourself from actually being the proponent. I don't know how that's going to be possible, but time will tell.
Right.
And I will hope that you have found this experience enjoyable enough to come back at another later date.
I look forward to it very much. Always enjoy your respectful inquiries.
Something more important, or if that is. With that, this is Conversations with Sam. We've had the enjoyable experience of talking with Jesse Davis over the past hour. Some of it is probably irrelevant. Some of it might be important. We'll never know until perhaps maybe an election troubles our weary steps at some time in the future. In any event, I apologize to all the people waiting patiently for the music program that follows Conversations with Sam. And we'll sign off and turn it over to them. This is KFUG 101.1 on your FM dial, and you've been listening to Conversations with Sam and his guest, Jesse Davis.
Thanks again.
We're off.